Good evening, folks. It's Barry and Mike and William here from the Barry and Mike's MRR Tech Show for today is March 26th, May 26th, I'm sorry, 2015. So we're going to be talking tonight about DC versus DCC and trying to get people to understand the differences, why to choose one over the other, etc. So I'm your host, and Mike is my partner in crime. Bill is one of our panel guests. So let's get rolling a little bit. All the links will be available out in, in Google Plus and Facebook pages. Do just kindly put the links out there for everybody to attend. So let's get rolling here. Okay, so tonight's presentation, I said, is DC versus DCC. But before we get rolling with that, let's discuss all the great, wonderful things you can get through YouTube Model Builders. We have our free online e-magazine, which we just published the 3rd issue of a few weeks ago, so you can go download your copy. We have our Tuesday and Thursday night live chat and presentation hangouts. And once a month, Bill and I do the YouTube Model Builders live show on the 3rd Saturday of every month. And all the schedules and all the goodies can be found at YouTubeModelBuilders.com, so please go visit there. So you can get the email download from there and everything else. All the schedules are published and such. And don't forget about the YouTube Model Builders Big Build Contest. We'd like you to build a model railroad structure and put your build on YouTube. And you can be eligible to win some of our great prizes. It's hosted by Eric from IMRR.com on YouTube. And again, for more information, visit YouTubeModelBuilders.com. So, first thing we'll go through a few slides here. What I have up on the screen here is a simple single track, single locomotive, single throttle wiring diagram. So this is typical of either a standard DC throttle or a DCC command station. So when you're running a single locomotive, you need 2 wires to the track, and it doesn't matter whether it's DC or DCC, that's all you need to run one locomotive. Now,
that's like the train set you get for Christmas there, Barry.
Exactly, Mike. It's the same thing like you'll get if you go buy a DCC ready train set like from Bachman or one of the Walters Railtech ones. This is pretty much what you get. An oval track, a couple wires to it, and either a DC throttle or a DCC command station, and a locomotive and some cars. That's pretty much what you get out of the box there, like Mike said. Now, if you want to get fancy and run multiple locomotives, you have to do this. So this here is showing we have gaps in both rails. So now we have 2 blocks, which is old terminology from back in the day of the only DCC or DC layouts. But you can see 2 locomotives here. We have 2 different throttles. So one throttle runs this locomotive, the other will run this one. And with these switches here, you select which throttle, or cab as we like to call them, controls which locomotive. So if you switch them both to A, you would run both locomotives off of one throttle. But if you want to operate this side separate, you'd have to set it to, say, cab B. And that way you have independent control. And as you want to run more locomotives, each one needs its own throttle, its own block to run in. So you just keep adding throttles and adding a lot more switches. And say if you want to control more than 2 throttles on one block, you might have to go with like a multi-way switch or like a rotary switch to switch between all the throttles. So the wiring gets rather complicated, rather fast. And it's not terribly difficult, but I mean, it just becomes a rat's nest underneath of your layout. And then
definitely, Barry. And the thing to point out about this too, this is like 1950s technology. This is last century stuff. You know, Lynn Westcott did this. John Allen, all the old school model railroaders had setups like this.
Man, if anybody remembers the old Atlas wiring book, this is with even though it used their switches, it's pretty much what this does. I mean, it's basically a diagram of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have your two wires from here on cab A, go to this terminal, and they go over to this terminal. So whenever the switch is set to this side, you're on cab A. Conversely, the wires on this side and this side go to cab B. So when you flip the switch to the right, you get your cab B throttle. Like Mike said, it hasn't changed in the last 60-some years until the advent of DCC about 20 years ago. Then we went back to something nice and simple. As you can see here, the difference between this and the original diagram, now we have two locomotives on the same track. And they can be operated totally independent of each other because rather than using the throttle to change the voltage in the track, DCC is a fixed voltage. These handheld throttles, which talk to the address of each locomotive, control the locomotive by sending a signal to tell it to speed up or slow down. They don't alter the track voltage. So this is as simple as it gets, and as long as you have enough electrical capacity in your command station and enough throttles plugged in, which you can extend your throttle connections here by putting faceplates around your layout where they can plug in, you can have a whole lot at one time. And it all depends on how many amps your command station puts out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing to point out here, Barry, too, is that a lot of the DCC starter kits, the throttle's built into the command station.
Yes. Oh, yeah. All the very base ones, like a Zephyr, Power Cab from NCE, the NCE Twin, which is two throttles in one enclosure, like the old MRC Twin Masters, but it's a
Yeah.
DCC system. The Bachman EDC Command's got the throttle built into it. The one from MRC is one just like it. So does Walters. Their Railtech systems are basically clone of the Zephyr. So they have built-in throttle, like Mike said. Most of them have an extra jack in the back where you can create what's called your throttle bus. So this is the throttle bus out here, and you can extend that to have multiple connections to plug your actual throttles in. In a more complex system, you can actually connect this to a computer and run it with wireless throttles by using wireless features of the command station manufacturers, or like a lot of us do, you can use the JMRI computer software with like the iPhone and your tablet to control, and they act as throttles as well. So it's definitely a much simpler wiring system, but if you get into a very complex layout, no matter which system you select, you can also get fairly complex wiring, because with DCC, the only time you need to block the layout out like I did in the second diagram is for power management or signaling. So we'll go on to explain that in a little bit. So.
And detection, too, Barry.
Oh, yes, that's true, Mike. Yes, detection also. So Chris Healy's asking where the link is, so I'm going to go out and put these links out because some people seems to be, I only got 9 viewers, so I'm going to go spit a few links out real quickly while we talk here. But yeah, I mean, the very basics of DCC versus DC is there's a lot of reasons to use either. If you're a beginner, it's pretty easy to get into DC without having too much problems. Sometimes DCC is like daunting to people, and it's not really that bad. But they always get worried about it's too complex or whatever. Guys like us are definitely willing to help out. It's not too bad. Why don't you give them some little input on that, Mikey?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what's going on in DCC world is out of the box. It's real simple to use. You be up and running is just as easily as setting up the old train set. The old train set you got in the 70s or 80s, even the 90s. A lot of the new train sets now come DCC. They're DCC sets, not that much more expensive than the traditional sets. I think I got a lovely little steam set for like $115 from Bachmann. They had the little Easy Commander station. They had a sound locomotive. Basically that's where DCC shines is how much control you have of the locomotives. But the interesting thing is with DCC, and we did talk a little bit. Barry mentioned detection and signaling and all that stuff. Basically, to get all that working, we go back to the old ways of putting gaps in there and creating blocks to do all that fancy stuff. So basically, it started simple. Basically, if you go back to the 1930s, use the car battery. I mean, you can't get much simpler
Yeah, that's
than that.
true. I never even thought about that one.
Yeah, so, and then you basically come to using AC, convert it to DC with a bridge rectifier. Then you start with the cabs and different gaps and blocks. And then with DCC, you go back to the simplicity of just a single train operation where you can run multiple trains. And now we go full circle back to complex wiring. So DCC can be as simpler or as complicated as you like.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the advantage of DCC over DC, and one of the advantages is if you like operations type systems, DCC is so much easier for you to use for operations because you literally have independent control without doing anything else to your track, unless, like we've been saying, that if you want to detect where your trains are for signaling or whatever purposes, or if you have a large amount of locomotives and you need to manage the power flow on your layout. Other than that, I mean, there's no real other good reason for DC unless you're just running a couple of trains and you can make some simple blocks in your layout. You don't want to spend too much money. You just want to watch your trains go around. And there's no reason to invest in DCC at that point. It really is a good thing, especially for operations, is my favorite reason behind it. And plus, when you have a sound engine and everything, it allows you to operate all the functions of the engine and make it that much more realistic in my mind, especially with, things like the wow sounds and the new soon coming out Paragon 3 decoders from Broadway Limited, that all have functional braking and such. It really starts to become a much more realistic way of operating your layout. So,
yeah, that's not to say that some of the functions of a DCC engine aren't available to DC users, but you have to do some crazy throttle gyrations. For example, with the Broadway Limiteds, you have to, if you want to blow the horn in DC mode, you have to reverse the polarity while it's on it. Which,
absolutely.
On some power packs, it's a little difficult. It can be done, but
Broadway Limited actually sells a controller that you can plug into your DC throttle. It gives you like the basic functions like your headlights, your bell, your bell and whistle horn, etc. But that's something you plug in between because it sends an actual DCC signal out, I think, over the rail so the locomotive knows what to do, even though you're running in straight DC.
Right. Now, the other thing important about that too, Barry, is that Broadway has two versions of that. They have the one for the QSI, and then they have another version for the Paragon 2.
Yeah, so they're kind of very specific to their locomotives, yeah. So that was definitely something to consider, when you're doing this.
The other thing too to consider with those little boxes, you're talking about $60, $70, and for a couple dollars more, you can go to DCC.
Yeah, that's the thing. By the time you spent that money, you're right. You could go on and bought a DCC system. I mean, an entry-level system, you're talking less than $200. If you get them on sale, you can get like a Zephyr or a Power Cab for like $165, fairly reasonably.
Yeah, or for example, you get the whole Bachmann set for about that same price point.
Yeah.
And if you want to get your feet wet, that's not a bad investment. It definitely doesn't have the features of a Power Cab or a Zephyr. But by the same token, if you don't go past your 4x8, it's and you're not running more than 2 or 3 trains, it's perfectly adequate for that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I mean, that's how I started. I mean, you first showed me things on your Zephyr, and then I had went out and got myself a Bachman EC Command at a train show, and because they had it on sale, it was one of the what was it, the World's Greatest Hobby on Tour. They had this set for $50 with a locomotive, the track, and you know. So how could I turn that down? I got a DCC equipped locomotive and a basic DCC system for $50. I mean, I ended up giving it away to a friend of mine, but when he wanted to try it out, that got me going, got my feet wet with understanding a little bit about DCC and stuff. And later on, I ended up buying my Zephyr. So it's not a bad way to go. And the systems that Walther sells in the Railtech is, I think it's like a dumbed down. Well, I think it's basically like a Zephyr from what I've seen of it. It looks like a Zephyr controller. It may not be, but I know some of the Kato stuff, their controls look like they were made as a Zephyr too, So.
Yeah, they're different, but they got the little handles from the same place.
Yeah, that's what kind of makes it look like that,
Yeah, it has that family look.
Yes, Bill.
I don't know how this works. This is my first hangout on the panel, but I just wanted to point out, talk about the complexity, and Sven Frank writes, it's not the complexity, it's the price point that keeps starters away. My thinking on that is that on the price of engines today, at $300 a pop, $250 a pop, with sound decoders installed and and all that intricacy stuff that's put in there, why wouldn't you want to spend, if you're willing to spend $300 on engines and rolling stock in the heritage fleet from Intermountain, why wouldn't you want to spend that a little bit extra money, or the $190 on an NCE or Digitrax to run your prototypical engines if you want them to sound prototypical?
Oh, you're quite right there, so Sven. I mean, it's price point is a concern for people, but some people do have, like you said, they'll spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars to buy the brass locomotives, but then they'll argue if we bring a $20 decoder in.
Right.
I got to do my whole fleet. Well, you don't have to. You can convert your layout if you're on DC to DCC sections at a time if you want.
That's true, Barry. The other thing is that with DC locomotives, they can run on a DCC system. I mean, I know Digitrax and Bachman, you can run a DC equipped locomotive as is on the system. Yes. Now, granted, you don't want to leave it not moving. You want it to keep moving simply because friction and heat will build up in the motor as it's sitting on the siding not moving.
Yeah, it's supposed to, because of the way the DCC signal is actually a high-speed AC signal. It's switched it 8,000 times a second, and they vary the width of each pulse. It's remember the days when you used to use pulse power packs on DC? If you left your locomotive sitting there running at a low speed, it would tend to want to overheat because the pulsing would, muck with the motor. It's very similar to what goes on with DCC because it's a pulse AC, but it's what they call a square wave AC. So it switches so fast it mimics a DC signal.
Like the old momentum.
Yeah, very much so, Bill. You're absolutely correct. It's somewhat like that because they use the pulsing to get better motor control in DC, but because of the way the DCC signal switches, that's also an advantage that gives them good motor control. So it was actually very well thought out when Lentz and a few of the other major players in the beginning designed this system.
Oh, when they changed from the AC to a square wave to give it that pulse width modulation, was to override on a DC signal to get the appropriate signal into the decoders.
Yeah, exactly. And now they just use that as the power source rather than having an underlying DC signal in there.
The other thought too about the price issue is that for DC you don't have to go out and buy like the Empire Builder set or get boosters right away. The reality is that the majority of model railroaders never go past the 4x8 sheet of plywood.
At least for a while.
So I mean, if you pay,
There was a chat message sent in of Andy Crawford there that when you look at the price issue too, what you don't, if you what you don't spend on a DC system versus a DC system, you spend that all that money on your wiring and your toggle switches and block selectors and your time wiring the layout like that. So in the end, other than the cost of decoders, there's not a terrible amount of difference for making, especially as the complexity of the layout goes up. The more wiring, the more switching, the more planning you have to do. The the cost comparison just kind of goes out the door. But it's hard because the thing is you're spending more money up front.
A new DC power pack, one of the better ones, is $179, and you can buy a DCC system for $149.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bill. You can pick up a Zephyr or a power cab or
anything, yeah.
Yeah, I mean even the MRC system for that money or less.
Right.
So if you catch them on sale, I mean I picked up my Zephyr Extra when it was brand new. I got it on sale for $150. So I mean it's really getting harder and harder in my mind to justify going DC. But if you have a massive fleet of locomotives and you want to make the switch, then the time and money spent to install decoders, even cheap decoders, becomes your only question in my mind. I mean, if you want to operate in any stretch of any imagination, DCC is definitely the way to go. And Mike's Club, I mean, we had it for like 10 years or more. It was on DC with 3-cab wiring and everything. And we were 100 feet long. We had what, 18 gauge wire under there for the bus. And we ended up testing it with DCC and found we had no issues. We literally went down the panels, set everything to the same cab, plugged the DCC system in place of the DC system, and we were off to the races.
Yep.
We paid to have 2 sound decoders put in 2 of our locomotives, and that was it. We were done.
In fact, that original test run was done with sound locomotives too.
Yeah, when we tested it, actually, we went down to the one end of the layout so that we could test the power feed up the whole bus. We clip leaded a Zephyr to the tracks, and we had the Zephyr throttle, we had a plugged-in UT4, and we used a little netbook with JMRI to run an on-screen throttle, and ran 3 sound locomotives all day with no problems whatsoever, and didn't make a stinking change to the wiring and the layout. That was, like I said, it was only 18 gauge wire or 18 gauge feeders, nothing fancy, not like they're saying, oh, you need a 12 gauge or 14 gauge bus with this. And we use it as is and just set all the cabs the same and had not one hitch all day. Now, I'm slowly rewiring it to get rid of all the extra wire as I work on modules, but I didn't have to do that. We spent a couple of years trying to say, we want to spend all this money to buy the system, install decoders, rewire the entire layout. But we were looking at $300 to $400 to rewire the layout. And in the end, we tested it. We didn't need to do any of that. It cost me $150 for the Zephyr, which was my personal one that I use at the club, and then a little bit of money to install some sound decoders, and that was it. So it's very hard to justify in my mind not going DC compared to everything else, But people, get along well with DC, so it's easy, it's Everybody under the sun has known how to wire it from day one. So I think so. There are some other
I mean,
complexities.
the nice thing too is that you can run your DCC locomotives on DC. So
Yeah.
there's no reason not to go buy the new Intermountain Heritage fleet if you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true.
But the reality is, whatever works. This is the tech show, so we are obviously talking the techie stuff.
Yeah.
It's not the low tech show.
No,
Speaking of tech, I have a good question to ask.
What's that, Bill?
Has anyone done it before, or is anyone even contemplating doing it? I want to run a DCC for sound and motion only, and use DC for all my detection switches and operation.
Not that I know of, Bill. I mean, that's a good question.
I'm doing CTC, but I'm doing it with DC power.
Mm-hmm. I don't see why you can't do something like that. I mean, the detection circuit you can hook up to, just the basic simple wire. What is it?
We're still using
coil. Simple coil to detect where the train is. And
right, block detectors.
Yeah, it's like a block detector. You feed that to an Arduino or whatever, and you can do the detection. And throwing the switches manually, that's easy. It's been done.
If you have an older style detection system that's designed for DC, if it's just a coil type block detection, the back end controls can really be anything you want, because that is not talking to the DCC track command. So it's its own environment. The only thing it does is measure the current flow in the wire going to the track. So it's totally isolated from the actual signaling system.
Yeah. Right, and there's no reason you can't do that, but the majority of people want to integrate it all together into one thing. But if you want separate, there's no reason why you can't.
I mean, people use like a Digitrax signaling detection system with an NCE throttle, or they use CMRI modules and stuff like that with Digitrax and NCE. So you can intermix different kind of systems.
Well, here's the thing now. I hooked onto the NCE, which plugs directly to the JMRI from the computer right to the NCE system.
Right.
If I throw a switch manually, JMRI throws it back because it's already been set for the route. It will not override. If I go to another system other than JMRI, I can throw it manually. But what happened was I came up with a CTC panel.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's the flat panel with the 2 quarters on the sides.
Right.
And I want to run that and use the DC through that to run the system.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, if you want to do that, you would have to have your turnout motors and everything would have to be DC. You probably use a capacitive discharge machine with snap type motors, or Fortises on their own independent wiring system that are controlled from your CTC panel.
We're using servos.
Yeah, you can use servos too, because you can run. Most of the servos can be ran through push buttons. So you can use, buttons on your CTC panel that would, close the contacts on the push button, or use a relay that would, trigger the pulse to flip the turnout with the servo. That could all be done totally independent, Bill.
It's got a rotary switch. You turn the rotary switch, you set your signal, and then you push the button.
Yeah, and that would send the pulse out. So you'd have this, when you send the command, it would have to send the command out to either a control board that will flip the turnout, or to like a relay that would signal the turnout. Then more than likely it would have to be some kind of logic control board. I just noted Philip posted something in the chat here that we discovered early, but he asked, putting a DC engine on DCC, will it burn it up? Like Mike said earlier, if you leave it sit idle on a powered track, yeah, it will fill, but eventually it'll burn up the motor. That's why if you're going to run a DC engine on a DCC system, say using address 0 on a Digitrax, when you're done running it, and don't run it like for 3 or 4 hours, even running it can overheat it. Park it on a siding where you can turn off the track.
Yeah, you can do it the other way around, though. You can run a DCC engine on DC.
Right.
Yes.
You can run that all day.
Yeah,
Yep.
that you can do all day because, anyway, in the end, when the DCC signal gets to the locomotive, being as it's square wave AC, it's rectified to DC for the motor. So that's why you can run a DCC equipped engine on a DC layout with no effect, because the bridge rectifier doesn't change the signal then.
Right.
And I might suggest a couple components about talking about what Bill was with the switches. The question is about what brain or what's in control of that system. So something has to have the master knowledge of how your switches are going to be switched or what have you. That's either going to be JMRI or a Roku Z21 or it's going to be a manual system with the switches. Anytime you have anything with more than 2 heads is a monster. So if 2 systems are trying to master control your routing system, they're going to compete, and that's why JMRI wants to take over and remanage that. The question is about who controls, not necessarily who controls it, but who keeps track of what the current state of everything is. So it is difficult to use JMRI in a situation where JMRI expects to be in control and have intimate knowledge of everything going on, yet you're controlling stuff behind the scenes without giving JMRI any knowledge. So if you keep in your head when you're setting this up that JMRI is going to know everything, then you need to use JMRI in some capacity. If you're not going to let JMRI control it, then you just have to take JMRI out of that mix.
Well, in order to prevent it from throwing turnouts, after, say, you manually set one like with a front panel control, it may be built-in functionality that since you set it with a route command and then you change it, it's going to detect that a change and try to reestablish a route. You may need to create your routes with custom logic scripts that don't do that. So therefore, now you talk getting the custom coding. That's why, I mean, if you're using JMRI for your CTC system, you actually need to probably look at all the proper components that work with it and, you know, see how the logic works so that you can do what you want to do. Like, you probably would need to get into custom logic or look at another component system like CMRI that ties in with it that controls everything versus, say, using Digitrax components or something like that, or Team Digital. I mean, you have to investigate how all the components from the different manufacturers work together to try and do what you want to do.
I'm going to take a wild guess here and say that I believe that you're using DCC track power to power the switches. What needs to happen is you have to divorce the...
I'm not.
No, you're not.
You're not? Okay. That would be the first thing I would have had you do if that was the case would be to divorce it. You have to use the
Run a Tam Valley, and if you push a fascia button, it'll throw the switch. But in the same return, if he's on the CTC panel, he throws the rotary switch to open the switch or close it, and you put the button, it'll do it that way. You don't have to use a relay or a logic board for it. It's a direct.
Okay.
That was nice.
I think it all depends on if you have feedback or not, too. If you have a system with no feedback to JMRI, for instance, it doesn't know where that switch is. It's just going to send a command to go to that position. It can be easily overridden by a fascia button or some other system.
That's the problem. It doesn't. When I had JMRI running and I hit the button on the fascia to change it over, JMRI would throw it back because the route had already been set on the computer.
I can answer. I used JMRI with those Ham Valley's singlets. They change them using JMRI, and you can change them with the fascia board. But because there's no feedback to JMRI, it doesn't know that you've changed it. So you can do it like that. You get your route through the JMRI, and then at any stage of the game you go on, you can play your analyst and your station board, change it according to any other direction.
Yeah, like I said, it could very well be something to do with the components and how they're configured. I mean, for the turnout control board, are you using singlets, Bill, or are you using like one of the quad controllers?
It's the bigger, not the singlet, but the bigger unit.
Oh, the quad board or the octopus. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I don't remember off the top of my head, but you might be able to configure.
But it would keep throwing it back. Now, if I shut JMRI down, then I could control everything off the fascia boards.
Yeah, those octopuses, I believe, have the feedback to JMRI through the loco net.
So do the quad LN board has it too.
Yeah, the quads have feedback. The octopus does not. I have the octopus, and I can tell you it does not feedback to JMRI.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but the JMRI turnout table, you might want to look at the configuration of the turnout table.
Well, when I hooked in the railroading company, I could override everything. But
I mean, it could be. I mean, I'd have to do some research, Bill, but it could be in how there are settings
and it is the
in the
quad.
turnout table for each turnout and how they're supposed to operate. So I'd have to go and do some research on that and get back to you with an answer. There may be something in the configuration that can be changed.
It is the
prevent it from
quad.
doing that.
Say
What's
it
that?
is the quad I'm using.
It is
It's
the quad.
yes. Let me bring it up here real quick so I can tell you which one it is real quick.
Is it because there's two? There's the quad pick and the quad LN. Quad LN had a LocoNet jack. That would allow you to have feedback. They did away with the older quad pick board. You
Yeah.
just have the quad LN now.
And get this thing to load real quick here. I should have went.
While he's looking at that, I might also suggest that if you're looking at DCC systems, especially with comparison to price, but even if money's not an object, that you should consider in your list of DCC options the SPROG. If you're a tech-savvy kind of person, that's an extremely cost-effective solution to get you in. If you're already comfortable with computers, you can get into a DCC system for $100. It's what I'm using to run my layout, and I can run many users. Because anybody that's going to come over is going to have an iPhone or an Android phone. I could have quite a few users operating on the layout and be out $100 throttles and all. So it's definitely something that I would recommend at least leaving in your list for consideration if you're tech savvy enough to be comfortable with a computer.
Well, that's true. They also have their own boosters that are 5 amps for $50. So you can really, if you want to operate your layout that way, you can certainly do it inexpensively, and you can put a pretty big layout because you can put multiple boosters like any other system together, but you can do it a heck of a lot cheaper than spending $200 on a booster. You know, you could buy 4 5-amp boosters from, Sprague for the same price.
And you can use the Tam Valley boosters as well. If you're comfortable using an iPhone or an Android phone, and many of the users who've talked about it on the forums and otherwise, that I've only used it now with a couple phones, but there's people using the Sprague with and even NCE and others, that the Y throttle system seems to be more responsive than the NCE throttles for some users. So it doesn't seem to have much of a downside, and that's the reason I went that way with my personal layout. And it wasn't even a cost thing. It ended up being quite cost effective. But if you're considering cost, it's quite cheap. But all money aside, I still chose to go that way on my layout.
Okay, Barry.
Yes, Bill.
Is the switch right? And it's got the PC board and all with it.
Okay, the switch right are individual switch machines. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that there. they
It can be
work.
run.
They
Can be
can
run
run
on
right from
these.
DCC, but they just take straight DCC commands and have the fascia controller. So you wouldn't be able to do any route selection or anything in that.
Well, it
They're
will
individual.
use DC power also.
Yeah, you can use 5-volt power supply on them to power them, strictly so that you don't take power from your DCC bus.
Right.
So that means they can operate independent that way too. You don't have to. You can use them with the front panel controllers, or some alternative method that can interact with the push button connection that runs the front panel controller. Because it's just a micro push button. You tap it once, momentary contact, and it flips it. Tap it again, it flips it back. So any momentary contact switch could do that, or any kind of circuitry that can mimic, a momentary contact switch, which you could do using CTC panel hardware and everything. You could set your route and then have the send code button send, a momentary closure to the circuit that would fire off all the servos as well.
Well, all the new ones that I'm going to install on my layout here and now are all going to be singlets. I'm not going to use the switch rights anymore. Mainly because you don't need that big PC board with the control and the feedback for your DCC. I'm going to straight DC, so I don't need it. I'll just go with the singlets.
That's a good idea, Bill.
I like the singlets too. Like you said, it's small, it's self-contained, and unless you have a real dense population of switches, you really don't need anything else.
Right.
What's the cost comparison of the singlet? I mean, it's to have 4 singlets versus the quad, or 8 versus the octopus. Isn't it a fairly large? Isn't it a lot more expensive to buy the singlets?
It is more expensive, but it's not that much difference. It's only like an extra $5 over the 4. It's really not that prohibitive. The problem with the quad is basically the distance you have to go to get to the servos. I mean, there's only so much range. I think it's like a meter or something like that before the signal degrades to the servo. Like I said, if
we're running a DC.
Yeah.
That's why we're running the 5-volt DC
dense.
bus line.
Yeah, because the 5 volts gives you a little bit more control over it versus taking it from the DCC signal.
Right.
We have some sections that have like 4 to 5 feet of servo wire going from the quad board to a turnout, but that's about as far as we go, because since our layout there's sections of the layout that have turnouts in them, and so we kind of group all the boards there. Like the board is literally mounted in the back of the control panel, and all the wiring fans out through a harness from there. So it's all within 5 feet in either direction of the control board.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not too bad. But I mean, you might be able to run it longer distances if you, rather than using the regular servo harness wiring, let's use heavier gauge wire, so you don't get the voltage drop in that fine servo wire, which is like 26 gauge or something like that. So that's kind of your limiting factor there. You might be able to go further if you're ever running, say, like 18 gauge or 16 gauge wire. But then at the very end, you have to, connect it down to the servo connectors with some thin pieces of wire. But if you keep it short, you might get more distance out of it.
Yeah, we're running 5-volt bus line with 14 gauge wire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In all honesty, with servo, there's only 3 wires. There's a common, there's a signal wire, and then there's a +5. And I think the limited factor is the +5 degrades after about a meter. So conceptually, you could power the servo. If as long as the common's honored, you can add a 5-volt, wire that servo directly to 5-volt plus, as long as you have the signal wire going back to your controller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why we're running the bus line, so we can keep the 5-volt constant all the way through.
Right. Yeah, or you can use a 7805 with power. What do they call it? 7805. What's the 7805?
Voltage regulator.
Voltage regulator. Yeah, I had a problem remember that.
LM7805 or 7905 for negative 5 volts. Actually, the best bet, and we'll probably talk about this one of the shows, is like talking about power supplies eventually. But that kind of stuff, you can use a modified computer power supply.
That's
You
what we got.
can say 500-watt computer supply. You go to 5 volts, you can get like 30 amps out of it. So
That's what we're using.
yeah,
That gives us 12 volt for our lighting and 5 volt for the switches and signaling.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean it's great. I mean, but the thing is, you got to figure out how to modify each one because there's several different methods of modifying them. But that's something we should probably do one time, Mike, is discuss, you know, layout wiring and control and power buses and all that stuff. That'd be a great thing to do here.
Yeah, it'd be a nice topic.
Yeah, as far as what we're getting into here with this presentation, we've also now crossed the barrier into a good reason not to do DCC layouts because we've gone into the deep technical end of the pool. And
Yeah, I'll shut up for a while.
no, that's all right. Well, you brought a good reason why some people don't do it because they don't want to do those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Like one guy commented in the chat, "Watch me trains go around."
Yeah.
Realistically, if he can set up a couple of blocks with a few throttles to run a couple trains, even on separate tracks, what's wrong with that? If that's what he wants to do, he wants to do. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you know, we ought to give him a DCC. No, you don't have to go to DCC. But guys like us that want to operate 4 or 5 trains on a layout, we want to do switching and mainline runs and signaling, you have no choice. DCC is the only way to really go to make it nice and simple. As you see what Bill's trying to do, he's trying to integrate a lot of different systems together so it gets more complicated. You can do it all in a DCC environment.
Prototypical control.
Yeah, see, the guys that do what he's doing with the CTC panels that are physical, most of them are using things like CMRI or other modules that are designed to connect to a physical CTC panel so that it operates like a real CTC panel, where you set all your turnouts to make your route, then you hit this what's called the send code button, and it sends the signal to the appropriate turnouts that you've selected. So you need more complex electronics to make that work, and CMRI system, which is Bruce Chubb's system, is the one that a lot of people use when they're building panels like that.
And
now,
you need a dispatcher that
what's
knows
that?
what he's doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, his system is still alive and kicking, man. It's very popular. And it's got full support in JMRI, so if that's something you're considering using, Bill, there is support for that in there that may get around some of the problems you're running into trying to roll in your own system, you know. But yeah, I'll look into the route issue of JMRI if there's any way to control. I know you can set it to monitor feedback. So if it has a monitor, it might want to throw the turnout back. If you turn off the monitor, it may not. I mean, I haven't gotten into investigating all that myself yet, but that's a good thing for me to look into for you. But I mean, as on topic here for DC versus DCC, I mean, a lot of this stuff can be done just as readily on a DC system, just that you're going to run into much more complex wiring. And if you want to do things like Bill's talking about, you can do the same thing with block detection and automated switch control from a CTC panel, but you can do it all standalone without a computer and everything like that. But now you're just as complex of a system as DCC, but the wiring is, you need like an electrician under your layout to keep it running. I mean, I've seen even DCC systems when people are doing complex like signaling and block detection, it gets just as bad. Yeah, so they both have their drawbacks when you get highly complex. But in the end, I think DCC systems, if they're done properly, tend to be a simpler way of doing things.
That's true. You know what? It's interesting too. If you want to stick with DC, take a look at the MIT Train Club's website. They're all DC, and they have a lot of craziness going on with computers. Because I mean, basically, they're comp sci guys. They're building the computer control system, and they want to stay with the lowest common denominator, which is DC engines.
Yeah, there's no reason that you can't. You know?
Mm-hmm.
They all switched to that Bluetooth thing too.
Oh yeah, well,
I think in the end, I mean, it's a shame Bachman's the first one to come out with it, because the company that provided it to him, Blue Rail, is applying for a patent, and I'm hoping Bachman doesn't have them locked up so that no one else can use it. Because think about it, what we're all doing with JMRI and wireless throttles on our phones, and wireless custom systems from Digitrax and NCE. If everybody in the future, especially younger kids get in the hobby, are going to want to use their phone, they're going to see the advantages of that. Bluetooth is the ideal way to go. It eliminates all the computer infrastructure completely. You pair your phone to the locomotive you're running, and now you have control of it. That's it. I mean, it's really that simple. And you don't need a computer.
Yeah, I mean,
nothing.
The reality is, if you look at Bluetooth, what it was meant to do, okay? The whole idea of Bluetooth is it was a replacement for wire. It's because it basically was born because all the crazy phone adapters, okay? So by definition, it's a wire replacement. The patent is ridiculous because, like Barry says, it's doing exactly what's being done today with a wire. So it's really, if you go back to the original Bluetooth spec, what it was designed to do, it's the same as a wire connected to the system, which is something we do today. So the patent's ridiculous. It should be thrown out.
You're absolutely right, and not to mention the original Bluetooth specs, as far as our phones were concerned. Everybody knows them as Bluetooth headsets. You got the thing sticking in your ear. Well, Bluetooth is way more than that. The original Bluetooth spec is a wireless network. Like Mike said, it's meant to be wireless. And it's designed to connect audio devices. You can connect two devices together, like a keyboard to your laptop or a keyboard to your tablet. You can also connect two tablets and transfer files if the software is there to do it. So it's a networking protocol. So you can have multiple devices operating over Bluetooth.
Wireless command control.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, what Mike was mentioning about the patent that BlueRail.net is trying to come up with, they've got a preliminary application in. There's not a patent yet. They haven't granted one, but the problems with it, like you said, is they were granted review, even though even granted the application was accepted. So there's tons of prior art for wireless train control.
Mm-hmm.
Even Ring Engineering's Ring Pro system is wireless. It may not use Bluetooth, but it's still a wireless control system. Their patents written for Blue Rail, not to say pretty much we're using this by Bluetooth. We're using this by a wireless method. Any wireless method should be covered then, which means if I decide to use Bluetooth or some other future communications protocol, their patent could make that a violation because it's too generic. And I think in the end, they may lose their patent application, or, like usually happens, the government will be stupid enough, yeah, that's a cool idea, grant the patent, and then everybody else in the sun has to fight to say, that's invalid, you didn't look at prior art, etc. So
whatever.
It's just going to stumble the market from adapting to that technology.
Whatever happened to the ruling that they had in the patent office that electronic devices and controls could not be patented?
That went away a long time ago, Bill.
Yeah.
Trust me, there was one company out there that came up with this vague patent for taking an optical system and basically scanning a document and putting it into a format that can be edited or stored on a computer network. That's their patent. and it was granted after scanners were invented, and now they went out and had the right to sue every scanner manufacturer in the country. So now the scanner manufacturers had to spend money to get the patent validated, and that's what happens in this day and age. The patent office, either through sheer stupidity or just being overwhelmed, doesn't do the due diligence to say, is there prior art?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't submit it with prior art, they're supposed to review to see if there is, and they usually don't. So they rely on who's submitting the patent to say, this is a unique idea. Nobody else has done this before. And they use subtle wording. Like I said, we're going to use a wireless method of control for connecting to a single individual locomotive and providing operational features such as throttle, sound features, etc., over a wireless system. Now that invalidates pretty much everybody else's wireless control method. So if they get a patent, they can be sue other manufacturers for using anything related to wireless.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem. Countries got sue happy.
They have. Well, the
Yeah.
the other part, the other condition of a patent is that no reasonable other person could come up with the idea. It's a unique idea. The
Absolutely.
idea of having devices controlled wirelessly has been done ad nauseum. So it should be thrown out, just the fact that it doesn't meet that criteria. It doesn't really pass the sniff test.
Well, we've been using two-way radios for how many years?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
we used them on our
NCE,
club for years.
yeah, NCE has a wireless radio control.
Mhm.
So does Digitrax, so does MRC. I mean,
Well,
we
there's
used to
no
use.
patents on them.
It's no leap of faith to say, oh, well, the wire is between the control station and the throttle. Now the wireless is between the throttle and the locomotive itself. But that's not a big leap. I mean, you basically move where you're putting the transmitter and the receiver.
Yeah. I
No,
mean,
but we get
plus
into the argument of patenting a process versus patenting a technology with that. So I think that's where the argument is going to end up, is that they're going to be looking at very specific implementations, whereas the Blue Rails implementation that Bachman is largely behind is a specific implementation, and its specific details will probably be patented. However, we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space in the next 5 years. So, I mean, right now the argument in the real world between us real people building real layouts is DC versus DCC, and this is a valid presentation you're putting on for that reason. Whereas wireless, like the Tam Valley system and the stuff that Sven's talked about recently, and the Bachman Bluetooth, and there's some people talking about Wi-Fi control, and there's pluses and pitfalls to some of these solutions. Like with the Bluetooth solution, at the moment we don't have a way to integrate that with systems like JMRI. I'm sure that's going to happen with Bluetooth in a computer running JMRI. I'm sure that will happen, but at the moment we don't have it. And then how does consisting work with systems like that, etc.? Whereas I think we may see a wider implementation if we had a system that was based on Wi-Fi. Wider range, etc. And Duncan McCree from Tam Valley has been talking about some of that stuff. And if you're interested in wireless now, I think Tam Valley's system is probably heads and shoulders above any of the alternatives.
well, that might be a great thing. The biggest thing is that if whatever manufacturer comes up with this, that they release the communications protocol to the NMRA, just like Lens did with the DCC communications protocol. That way, we don't have to say, oh, I want a Tam Valley wireless system. I like their controls, but that means I have to buy Tam Valley's crappy decoders. Not that they have them, but you understand my point. Then we're back to, if I want a Digitrax system, I got to use Digitrax components. And that's what it would have been if Lens hadn't very graciously given the protocols, not the design, but the protocol, away to the NMRA. Now, if Blue Rail does that, and then they want to patent their specific variant of it, that's all well and good. But the thing is then, if they don't, you're stuck with their software, their hardware.
Mhm.
That's a step backwards for what's been going on in this industry for 20 years now. A big step backwards.
And the thing is, too, Barry, guys like you and I, we like to push the technology. So the holy grail, what we're after, is to have other people controlling our trains on the internet. I mean, that's the holy grail.
And see, with JMRI, you can do that because you can publish the JMRI web server and put throttles and layout controls and everything on a control panel that you can present over the internet. So the technology is there to do that. Because you can use the web server side to embed throttle controls on a control panel, and it can be done. It's a little difficult right now, but
Well, we do that with organs right now. I can sit here and load mine up and play my keyboard here and actually play the organ down at Pinellas Park.
nice.
Very cool.
Exactly, and eventually I'm sure me and Mike will play around with that concept, That would be fun to do, but yeah, because there is components to JMRI to where you can put all your controls necessary for that on an on-screen control panel that's served up to the JMRI web server.
But I think we would have to set up some sort of camera too, so you don't run my trains off the edge of my board there, dude.
Exactly.
And I've seen it done. NS Modeler, his YouTube channel, he had a recent YouTube video of his showed him running trains locally in the room with a friend of his running remote desktop to his JMRI system and running a train and just monitoring the block occupancy to actually operate the train. And that's absolutely possible to remotely dispatch right now, and may actually be a better experience and more prototypical if your dispatcher was geographically separated from the lane.
Sure. Last question, was that NS Modeler or NS Modeler 24?
Yeah, that's it. That's him.
Yeah, Josh. Yeah, because I didn't think Ben Earp did anything kind of like that on his YouTube channel. I know Josh does. He's a tech guru. I eventually want to get him on here when we do a signaling. We want to do a signaling show, but Mike and I got to bone up on signaling, and then we can get Josh in here to correct us when we're wrong.
Well, I like the idea of a dispatcher. That way, a remote dispatcher, because that way I don't have to tie up any of my layout space making a dispatcher station if I go for the operations.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like in my house, I could have a crew downstairs running and dispatch them up here.
Well, I have a friend that can't make my op sessions anymore, and he was one of my better dispatchers. He's got to sit home with his kid. Well, he could sit home with his kid and dispatch,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you built a CCC panel in JMRI, you could present that to him through a web server and just connect it out over the internet. You'd have to publish it through your firewall, but you could do that.
Yeah, I haven't actually gone out over the internet, but I'm actually using that as a control panel for my Octopus. Rather than putting in fascia buttons, I have a tablet that I have sitting right there to control it via the web server.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did that at one train show. I set up a 4x8 tabletop. I use EasyTrack and I built a little switching layout. But I have my 18-inch tablet from work there with the touchscreen, and I set up a couple of web throttles on there and a CCC panel around the whole thing from that 18-inch tablet. It's great. People are loving it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to do that again, probably for our club show in July, to set that up, because I'll be doing my layout again, so I'll have to set that up. I'll have to get you to come down to the club show this year, Mike, in July.
Yeah. Well, I have to check my schedule. I got to check with the boss.
Yeah, this is true. I'm sure we can get you out to play.
Well, talking about DCC, I really hope that the NMRA approves the LCC.
I'm waiting.
It would make all the manufacturers have to set their controls that everything is operational with each other.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the interface device that they're designing lets you take all the throttle and accessory bus, like your LocoNet, and plug into one side and plug whoever's command station in the other side of the device, and it does the translating. That's at least that's how I understand it. So literally, I could plug in an NCE throttle, a Digitex throttle, an MRC throttle, LocoNet bus, onto the same device and hook it to an MRC command station. And it's been demonstrated. So, but just now people have to commit to building products like that.
Yeah, I mean, the NMRA will eventually come up with a standard for it, but it's not going to be quick because they all do everything by committees.
At least they have a name for it now. It's like Bill said, it's the LCC.
Right.
And they're starting to. I don't know if there's specs on the website about it yet. I should go check.
Yeah, but I mean, this has been the NMRA for 5, 6 years, 7 years, and they just have a name for it. I mean,
Well, yeah, before this it was the Open LCB.
yeah,
Yeah, layout command control.
Yeah.
That way
Yeah,
it's not any specific.
yeah, so that's what before originally it was the started out Open Layout Control Bus, and that was a group of independent people that started developing the concept, and then it was given to the NMRA to standardize.
I mean, if you look at OpenLCB, I mean, there was a big fight over whether it should use IP addressing or just regular, old DCC addressing. That was a big sticking point. They had two separate camps, and that held it up for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, that's why they changed now to go in through using an interface just to be able to read into a command station whatever throttles you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a good idea. They should pass that ruling.
I hope they do, Bill, because I'm looking forward to that, because that'll open up a whole different world of possibilities. You can use the best of all the systems. If you like your NC throttle, use that with your Digitrax, because that way you don't need to have two separate systems for accessories and signaling and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of nice possibilities to it.
And you don't have to use that ugly ass UT4.
I love my UT4s.
Well, I still say watch for MRC.
I know now that they're part of the JMY world, thank God. I think they could do something, but it took them I don't know how many years I've been talking to, what's his face, their tech. I can't remember his name. Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I would see him at Amherst, Frank, when are you going to give out the specs for JMY? And our proprietors, and then.
Yeah.
Last time I went down, Frank.
They're hiding in the winds. They're hiding in the winds.
6 months.
Yep.
And they were right. 6 months, almost to the day. They released it, and now they're supported on there. So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they were so concerned that their stuff would get out in the general public if they opened it up to JMRI.
I know.
The reality is they lost sales.
I know, and I kept telling them that, but their pride wouldn't let them go beyond that. And guess what? I really considered buying their system when we were looking at systems for the club.
Mm-hmm.
So I found out it wouldn't. It was number one. You can't use JMRI with it. It's off the list automatically. That was the druther. That was not a given. That was a druther. That had to be there.
Oh, yeah.
It was a given. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got that backwards. It was a given.
It was a given.
Didn't use it. It was off the list.
But they've been watching this LCC thing going on for years now, so I was saying watch, because if they pass that, I think MRC is going to jump out there and just...
If they were smart, they would, Bill.
Yep.
Not that they don't know what they're doing with this stuff. They just had their heads up their butts too long.
Well, they have a new CEO now, so...
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. If you want to make money in business, you don't worry about pride. You worry about making money.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're going to do a minute or two of housekeeping here and go back over all our good stuff for the show here. So as we all know, we're here in me and Mike's MRR Tech Show, the live hangout presentation from YouTube Model Builders. And YouTube Model Builders is your source for free model railroad resources. It's got our free online e-magazine. We have our live chat and presentation hangouts, which you are all participating in right now. We have our monthly YouTube Model Builders live show with all of our great guests and good giveaways. So everything can be found at YouTubeModelBuilders.com, all the information on schedules and events and everything, including the download for the eMag. Please, everybody who's watching, do not forget about the YouTube Model Builders Big Build Contest, hosted by Eric Hall from IMRR.com. So you can build a model railroad structure and put your build on YouTube by a series of minimum three videos, and you can be eligible to win a series of great prizes. Again, for more information, go to our website, YouTubeModelBuilders.com. And so we're back to our little graphics for the layout. So yeah, let's take a little minute there to discuss all of our, housekeeping function. So now here's a question up in the Q&A from Philip Wyman. What about RDC over DCC? I think I think the RDC protocol is some of the it's like DCC, but it's over radio control. And I think it's a proprietary standard. It's not a standard that all the manufacturers support. If I'm right, RDC is what Ring Pro uses, I think. Am I wrong with that, Mike?
Barry, is that the one where they use regular DCC decoders? Are they control them with the radio, or is that something?
Yeah. So the RDC part is independent of the DCC signals, I think.
Right, you just basically use the battery-powered decoder and you get the signal from the radio.
Yeah, I think so. The RDC sends the DCC commands over radio.
Mm-hmm.
There's another system that's like that, but it uses its own proprietary decoders and commands. I think that's what some of the dead rail stuff does.
Right.
They have their own controller. The ones from Ring Pro, they have like a DCC decoder in there.
Yeah, but the whole idea of dead rail is kind of dead. No, it's not.
No, actually, it's if more manufacturers start looking at it, it might be more interesting to people. Because I mean, the biggest problem is battery technology yet. If that catches up, I mean, we'll be back to having no power on our track. Like wind-up trains.
Yeah, right now it's only the large scales because the battery size. It'll be a millennium before they come out with a battery big enough or small enough actually to put in an N scale.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I guess sound decoder.
You'd be a hard time fitting a LiPo battery in a boxcar cabled in,
Mm-hmm.
But you can do it in HO scale now. It's like a hood unit. You can do it now. They make small enough LiPo batteries that'll fit in there, but you're still better off if you can put a bigger battery into like an attached freight car or a dummy unit. So it's got a ways to go even in HO scale.
Well, I mean, I think what would be interesting too is the keep alive capacitor gets replaced by a battery. I mean, that's basically you want power on the track because then you can recharge the battery as you go. At least some sections of the track.
You know what, Mike? I mean, that's a thought. What if instead of having to keep alive, you actually had a little LiPo battery about the same size? It might only last you 15 minutes or 10 minutes even, but that's all you don't need anything that long. You might be able to get a small enough LiPo battery to be smaller than the keep alives.
All right, Mike, you design it, I'll promote it, and we'll both make money.
Well, you know what though? It's funny you should say that because there is something similar like that on the market, or was on the market in Japan. Do a Google search for DigiQ, DIGI-Q train, or also some of the other Bandai stuff. I mean, well, definitely the DigiQ train had it. Basically, it's just little trains that ran on dead track, and they all be power. You charge them up. It was infrared control. I mean, it was a pretty cool little setup.
I think I've seen them at your house, Mike.
I'm into that weird stuff, Barry.
I know. That's what I told him when he finally convinced me to talk about narrow gauge. I said, "Okay, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to apply the Mikey Bird factor and go SN2." But yeah.
Actually, I should dig up the old DigiQ set, see if it still runs.
Yeah, it probably does. If not, we'll make it run again. Breathe life into it. But I mean, we've covered a good bunch of information concerning the DC side of things, and there's not as much to cover on the DC side. It's just there, you do these to this level, you're talking wiring complexity. But there's nothing different about the throttles. You get really complex like this with DCC, then you get into signaling and all that stuff, or you get into power management, which we didn't talk about yet. But if you have a large DCC layout, just like with DC, you have to break it into blocks, but not for control methods, but for power management.
Right.
So if you have a yard where you got
It's like our good friend Dick Sangus says. It's all in the books, dude. You just got to get like the old Lynn Westcott book and all the old wiring books. You can wire up DC till the cows come home.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what I mean. We have a lot of people in here to come and ask us all kinds of beginner questions, and I just kind of attribute it to the fact that we are now a I want the answer now type society, and so people getting out books and reading is kind of passe anymore, shall we say? So if you can go to a source where I ask my question, I get my answer, and that's all I need to know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way we kind of all live today. And some of the older guys don't understand that. Don't they know that there was a book published in that 50 years ago? Well, either they do, they probably don't want to read it, and hell, if someone can give you the answer without me spending all night reading the book, I'm happy with that.
Well, since I've been on this group, I've been watching Dave Vallejos under his layout doing wiring. And I asked him, I said, Dave, I says, are you on DC or DCC? He said, DCC. I said, hell, you've been underneath that layout for 6 months wiring it.
Yeah. That's the thing. He's got such a big layout, and for him to be able to run that many trains that he wants to run at once, he has to break it into power districts.
But actually, it's not that big.
Well,
the other thing to consider, too, is if you don't use you need a lot more feeders.
Yeah, and he also has like 3 or 4 reversing sections.
Yeah.
He has nested reverse loops. I mean, I worked for a while with him, figuring out where all the reversing sections were. One of his loops went halfway around his layout, and it reconnected the other end of his yard, and then it was 2 nested loops in his yard. So that's why he has. Mostly, that's why he has all those PM42s under there. They're not power matchers. They're all auto reversers for his yard loop and his mainline loop and everything.
5 PM42s.
Yeah, I mean some of them are for power management, but at least 3 of them I think are for auto reversing sections.
Yep.
And not that they're reverse loops, as in used to reverse a train. They just because the way the main line comes back in, it formed a reversing loop. He has a Y in the middle of his yard going to his turntables. There was another one. And then that connected to an outbound track, which looped around back to the other end of the layout. So now you got a double reversing loop there. So it took us a while to figure out where things had to go, but I worked with him in the beginning, and then he took it from there. But that's some of the things with a large DCC layout. If you have a yard and you want 10 sound engines sitting idling there, you're going to need like a 5 to 8 amp command station or booster, I should say, to run that yard while they're sitting there. So that's got to be electrically isolated into its own block. It's not for control, it's strictly for power, because those engines are all sitting there drawing that power. Now on the main line, you only run 2 or 3 engines at a time, so that might be its own block in between yard areas, has its own booster that's 5 amps. And then the next yard, if you got a bunch of engines, you put another big booster there and isolate that. But that's all you need to isolate, use boosters in isolation for in the blocks in DCC, aside from signaling, and block detection. So,
well, I tell all my beginners that they ask, well, what should I go, DC or DCC? I said, well, what are you wanting to do? And they tell me, and most of them tell me they want to run more than one train at different speeds, different directions, and all on the layout. I said, well, then you're going to want to go DCC.
Exactly.
You can run 2 trains on the same track in 2 different directions.
That's right. You can do a Gomez Adams with DCC. You have to wire the engine and do it on DC.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, every time someone comes and says, hey, I want to build this, or I want to do that, especially with computers, with train layout, first question you want to ask them, what do you want to do? And you go back to your concepts of layout design, what's your givens and druthers? What do you really want to do? What would you like to do? And if the given, like Bill says, is I want to run 3 trains in different directions, different speeds, that pretty much dictates a DCC system, or your complex block wiring system, for DC. But then, oh, I want to have signals. You can do that in its limited fashion in DC, but you're better off using DCC with detection to make it automated rather than. But if you want to have simple red, yellow, green lights, you can do that with a DC system with signal control boards just do block detection where your train's at. Then you only have to cut the one rail, run the feeder through the detector, and power it up, and the detector does all the work for you. But if you want to run prototype signals, now you need a computer behind it with some logic to control the different signal aspects and stuff. So it all comes down to...
Or a CTC panel.
What's that?
Or a CTC panel can
Yes.
control the signal.
Exactly.
But it has to be something.
It has to come down to what do you want to do. And that's one of the reasons I chose Digitrax versus NCE, because in my mind, especially now, I mean, you can't go wrong with either. But since I wanted to do advanced things like block detection and signaling and CTC panels with JMRI, rather than having two separate systems to run it, I can use it all in one under Digitrax, because there's a lot more stuff that's related to signaling that Digitrax compatible. NCE is supposed to be, they have announcements for signal controllers on their website, but they've been sitting there for a couple of years now and nothing's been done with them. Coming soon. So hopefully we see something, because then that will be a nice market for them and people might jump on board and start building signaling systems that are compatible with NCE so that you don't have to build a local net for your signals and run NCE for the rest of the layout. Not that that's a bad
The worst part about it, Barry, is they've got it on the handheld throttles already, on their command throttles. It's already on there. They just don't have the boards to go with the signal systems.
I know. I mean, our friend Dick.
That
up
irks
in,
me.
Yeah, I know. Our friend Dick up in Victor, New York. I mean, all the guys that we talked to that are our friends up there, they all know Jim Scorsese personally. I said one of these times we're going to go up there, and me and Michael arrange a meeting with him, and I'll bend his ear about the signaling. I don't care. I mean, it's like, come on, it's like if you're going to, like Bill said, put all that information on your doggone throttle, build the back end, okay, so that people can start using it. Because, trust me, those guys up there are diehard NCE fans. You know, they don't buy pretty much anything unless it's NCE. Now, we're making some inroads up there with TCS because the guys are really liking the sound. And not a lot of them have sound up there, but they've been very receptive to the demonstrations we've been given. So I actually got, well, I now have on my slate 9 locomotives to do for our friend Dick Senkus. So that's going to be fun. All Shays, Heislers, Climaxes, and a few regular steam engines too. So it's going to be interesting to do all them over the summer.
Don't forget mine.
Yeah, you have to send it to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope you did. I give you my address or not? Not to send it to you.
I got your email.
Yeah, email me and I'll send you my address.
Okay.
You can ship it over and then we'll see what we can do to get something stuffed in there.
Stuffed is a word.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, eventually, I know it's down the road yet, but GPS is going to be working on a slightly smaller version of WoW sound. It's not going to be like a drop-in type N scale or anything.
No, it'd have to be Z scale.
Yeah, they're going to actually go ahead and make the WoW soundboard smaller by taking all the connectors off and making it a hardwire board, which is okay by me, because that'll shorten the board and make it a little bit more narrow. They can maybe make it, a slightly smaller form factor that can fit in, different engines, So we'll have to see. That's probably a ways down the road yet, because they got more sounds to get for the diesel and stuff. So the diesel is still a big project on the books.
All right, guys. Here's a news flash for you. Here's a news flash for you. PCS is going to have GE sounds in the next month.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I knew they'd been working on it.
Sound set. It's coming out in a month.
All right. Now,
Got that right from the horse's mouth.
John Toy gets an RDC for me. One piece of G scale is my RDC. And you know what, Mike? maybe me and you should borrow their recording gear and go down to the Cape May Seashore line and get some recordings for them.
Yeah, that would be fun, dude.
Yeah. Well, they probably won't be running again until
Hey,
December.
what do the RDCs have? They have what? EMD 261s?
No.
No, they got
GM
small.
210 bus diesels or something
Oh, they
like
have
that.
bus diesels.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
bus diesels.
They were using a lot of those German pancake engines.
Oh, sweet. Okay,
Yeah,
so the Model 40 had the same engine, right? The RDCs have?
it might, yeah.
Because I have to put sound in my little Model 40.
Oh, yeah, it's true, yeah. Yeah, I have to find there was something like either a GMC 610 maybe, but there was two of them and they were on slides. So literally, you go in the back, you disconnect the fittings from the engine, pull the slides out, lift out the motor, drop in the new one, shove it back in, and reconnect it. You could swap an engine in 2 hours.
Oh,
Wow.
and the buses?
You know, on the RDCs.
RDC.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're mounted.
The ones,
Actually, that's really
ones I saw,
the
ones I saw had the German pancake engine. It was I think it was 6-cylinder diesel, flat.
yeah, the
was
ones
underneath.
the actual Bud RDCs were they were GM bus diesels, which were pancake type motors too, the ones that they used. But
Yeah, I think they were the Ford style pancake engines. But yeah, they were on rails, and they just disconnect the main wiring bus from the alternator, and then slide the whole motor right out on a rack.
yep, and then it was real easy to change. Now, Rapido, with their new Ultimate RDC model they're coming out with, they actually have dual motors, one for each truck, and they're located in the motor bays in the underbelly of the model. There's nothing. It's a full interior in it. No motors hidden behind dark windows. Nothing. The motors are in the motor bays themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I might have to go buy one or two of them just to have because they are probably the best looking RDC you'll ever see. Real stainless steel finish on them.
Oh,
Full
sweet.
interior. I mean, they look beautiful.
Not like the old 8-turns, huh?
No rubber bands brought up.
Plus, the thing is, the 8-turns were too short. They cut out 2 windows.
Yeah, and the profile of the dome wasn't correct or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So these RDCs coming in from Rapido, they're going to be a little pricey, but not as much as I thought. I mean, you probably get one with sound like $250.
So they're better than the lifelike Walters ones, the Proto 1000s?
Well, the thing is, the Proto 1000 has a motor up inside the body in the center, like you have a block.
Right, you need to get an RDC3 for them, so the motor gets hidden.
Yeah. So with the RDC ones that they have a full interior. The ones from Walters there's like where the exhaust stack, they have a thick wall where the motor is located at. So it still doesn't look quite right. But the body on them looks nice. They're nice and hefty with a die-cast chassis, and they don't run bad at all. They have an 8-pin connection in the board on top instead of cut these 3 traces and solder wires here method. But they run pretty good. I mean, I experimented with one with the Digitrax decoder, and it just to play with it for sound.
I have one I have to do up, and I think I'm just going to gut the motherboard and just wire it hard.
Yeah, you could do that. You'd have to put a shelf in there to put the decoder on.
Plus, I want like the tail lights on it, and I want like the number boards. So.
Yeah, that's probably what I should do to mine.
Take a Walters unit and put a nose on it, put the jet engines on the top.
That's right, dude.
And no one's ever modeled that. That would be a good add-on part.
New York Central.
New York Central. M497.
And sell the parts to convert your RDC to New York Central prototype for the jet engine one. That would be interesting to do. Now I can find some drawings, I can model them up.
They got the engines from an old B-47.
Is that what they were from?
Yeah.
That didn't look familiar, yeah.
Yep.
It looks like they literally cut the pollen off a wing and stuck it upside down on there.
That is exactly what they did.
The only problem was it would go 120 mile an hour forward, and then they have to hook an engine to it to back it up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess they forgot to install thrust reversers on there.
Well, they should have put another one on the back to go the other way.
Oh boy, that would look weird. The jet wash from one would, I guess they couldn't melt each other. But yeah, I'm still thinking that, you know, with the way people want to get in this hobby, we should all, you know, encourage them to go DCC. Just because they still sell DC locomotives, but you're starting to see more and more where locomotives come out and they don't offer them without sound. Not everybody does that, but some of the bigger manufacturers are starting to do that, where you go buy this engine, it's a real fancy engine, it's $300, $250, and they don't offer it without sound. So, and it's DCC. So you can run it on your DC layout, but like you said earlier, Mike, you're spending $300 on a dang engine. Why don't you spend $150 on a DCC controller and be done with it?
I mean, you know, Broadway did the kind of the same thing with the blue series or whatever, the blue line they had. Where it ran on DC with the sound and there was no decoder.
Yeah.
But you know, when you went to DCCify, it was a nightmare. And the thing is, I mean, where's the blue line now? It's like, you know, everybody said they wanted it, but when it came time to open the wallet, nobody did.
Well, they were cheaper than the full Paragon 2 systems. But
I think part of the blue line was because Mike's Train House was going, you know, going back to the patents and lawsuits. You know, Mike's Train House was getting a little, you know, lawsuit happy with him.
Well, they've been lawsuit happy with a lot of people.
Yep.
Yeah, the blue line, basically, like Mike said, it had a DC motor control with a soundboard in it that was DC and DCC. So it's basically a DCC sound circuit without motor control. So it wasn't that much cheaper than a full Paragon or Paragon 2 system. What you could do is buy a cheap TCS or Digitrax or MRC decoder that was motor only, plug it right in and go. I put a TCS DP2 in the one locomotive I had. And the trick is, if out of the box you run them an address 3, everything works fine. To program it to run on its own address, what you have to do is go on your sound decoder, program it without the motor decoder installed, set it to its address, and use what CV15, I think, to lock it.
You gotta lock it, right?
Yeah, then you plug in the motor decoder and set its address, and then you lock it. And then what you do is you set, what was recommended by people is you set the motor decoder to the first 2 digits of the road number. You set the sound decoder to the second 2 digits of the road number. And then you put both of them to the 4-digit number of the locomotive as the 4-digit address. That way, if you want to edit them and change the sound settings, what you do is you unlock the decoder using its 2-digit address, program it using its 2-digit address, then lock it again. And then when you ran it from the 4-digit address, you could actually control both the sound and motors. It's a complex nightmare of things to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
I mean, the best answer for a blue line locomotive is to gut it and put in a wow sound.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. I should do that to mine. It's a nice SD9.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the prime mover for it. You know what? Maybe I will do that, Mike. I've been looking for candidates.
You know what's nice about doing that, Barry? The speakers are already done for you. You know, you don't have to put the enclosures in. So it becomes an easy install. It's just a regular
Atari. Yeah.
On that same note, is there any, I'm sure there is, that we can consist without any serious limitations, or any that not even I'm aware of. Is it possible to consist additional sound decoders? So I am working with a solution for under layout sound in addition to the locomotive sound, and I have not found a way. You cannot read the CV values on the main. You can only right to CV values on the main, to all understanding that I have of it.
Yeah.
So you cannot get the speed of the moving train without some kind of weird logic and calculation. And if you want the wheel, click, and track noises and brake noises of the moving train to correlate with the speed of the train, which you absolutely would if you did it, then the only way I have determined how to do this, I mean, Pricom and some other manufacturers have boards that give some capability, but they don't account for that speed difference. So what I was thinking was taking a sound decoder and attaching it to a audio distribution network, like a whole home audio kind of system. I have one of those in my house, and using that and using occupancy detection to fire individual speakers. And then, so what you'd have is you'd have a sound decoder. You would consist it with your train. That sound decoder would be like a car sound decoder that would give you those wheel click noises, etc. And your block detection would just figure out what speakers to fire down the main line as you traveled. However, that sound decoder could be consistent with the locomotive to get speed. Does that make sense and seem like it would work?
Speed is the problem because be it steam or diesel, the chuck or the notching is all determined either by preset speed steps with everybody else or by the back EMF loading on TCS wow sounds. So therefore the decoder under the layout does not have the same loading on it for the motor that they do. So if you set it to run a manual notching and consistent, then you could do it because you notch the consist and all the prime movers would go up at the same time, but you could not do it automatically.
But I'd already kind of given in to manual notching anyway, since I want to emulate the I model heavy mainline Appalachian mountain railroading, and to truly get the correct sound of the train under load, you kind of have to give in to manual notching at the moment. So I kind of give in to that anyway, and I'm not totally against it, especially if it solves my under-track sound effects that I'm looking for.
That's pretty much the only way, because if you, other than, see, if you use something like Soundtracks or QS, not so much QSI, but Soundtracks, like, or even TCS, but you set it in traditional operation mode where the speed increment controls when it notches. Then you can do it as well, because it doesn't care about the load on when it notches or changes the chuffs. Every so many speed steps, things change. So you have Soundtracks, when you go, the only difference with TCS and Soundtracks, it does the stair step notching. TCS will do the same thing if you set it in traditional mode. So you have a preset value for every 15 speed steps, but give me another notch on your throttle.
Well, getting back to the original question too, I mean, because I think we went off a little bit of tangent here, but one thought here is to put in something like a speedometer, an optical speedometer, and have that determine your train speed. Because I mean, what you're doing is you want the speakers to fire off when the train hits a certain location. So if you put like two infrared LEDs or whatever like that, you can determine the train speed as it goes over it, and then you can fire off the sound based on that.
And I have a sophisticated plan for occupancy detection, so I am isolating every individual rail and I hand line. So I'm offsetting them by 18 inches, like you should anyway, the joints. And they're electrically isolated at every single rail, so I can detect a train every 18 inches down the line. I could even cut those rails to make that more accurate. I had been looking at a JMRI logic, and I had yet to determine in JMRI that would allow you to do the calculation for when one occupancy detector fires to the next, to the next, to the next, to calculate speed. Now, maybe you know, I'm sure you do know a function in JMRI, many functions in JMRI that I don't know, but I have yet to find a way to get JMRI to function based on a speed calculation.
Right.
Andy,
I think you will.
Andy.
Yeah.
Get a hold of George Celios from the Franklin of South Manchester.
Sure.
He has under-track sounds that is triggered with the speed of the train. Ask him how he did it.
That's a good thing to know, Bill, yeah. I mean, by the time you've invested all this money in putting occupancy detection and stuff in, and all the sound controls, not so much the occupants, but the sound controls and stuff. You might even want to consider looking at the soundtrack system. It's not an under layout system per se, but it uses transponding, digitrack transponding to locate your locomotive and switches speakers based on that location.
Yeah, my understanding is they're kind of backing off that system because they had some limited success with the transponding doing a good job of that.
Well,
but I haven't looked
that's the
around
problem with it. Digitrack's transponding really doesn't work right.
right.
I mean, people
I
can
originally
make it
thought
work,
I'd go.
but it's not highly accurate. You know.
Well, the other
Right,
thing
and I
too,
originally thought I'd go that way, but I've kind of fell off from that and in
Mhm.
favor toward block occupancy detection. And since you can buy individual block occupancy detectors or even those 8 or 16 channel block occupancy detectors so cheap, I just give in to doing it. Every rail has an
You
occupancy.
can probably pull it off with that, but like I said, the biggest thing is to synchronize your locomotive sounds, not so much the other sounds, but the locomotive sounds. You're going to need to use manual notching and you probably want to stick with all the same sound decoders, the same brand. And
Well, I'm
even
going to
same,
leave the sound in the locomotive for the locomotive sounds. I am in HO scale, so I can do that.
Right.
But the wheel squeal and brake noises are the ones that I'm recreating.
okay.
Speakers are cheap. Occupancy detectors are cheap. Getting the sound out is cheap. I mean, Procom boards are cheap, but you have to have a speed calculation. Otherwise, it's going to be a horrible effect.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
I got a question. You
What's
talked
that?
about the transponder. What is that? Can you explain that real quick?
Well, it's like an occupancy detector, but on steroids. Essentially, you set up detection just like you do with block detection, but the transponder receivers can talk back and forth between the command station and the transponder. So you can get much more accurate information. You can get things like the relative speed of the locomotive, things like that. Now, there's an improved version called Railcom that's more common in Europe, and not everyone, but a lot of the TCS decoders support Railcom. It lets you read motor temperature, all this other stuff, much more detailed information that you can use to do things with. But
Mhm.
Railcom's not supported by a lot of things in this country.
So theoretically, if you could get a lot of that metadata off the engine through the command or through the cab control,
Yeah.
you could capture that information and figure out the relative speed and then fire off the appropriate speakers because it could tell you the volume level based on the speed that's going and the type of sound.
Yeah,
You
but
really
like
have a
the
sound
Andy saying,
database
he
to
wants
select the
to
correct sound file.
yeah, he wants to be able to play, like control the speed of, say, the sound of the brake squeal and stuff. A lot of that's going to determine if he slows the train down,
Mhm.
it should play brake squeal, but there's no way to know that.
You can't
So,
read.
Isn't that already in a lot of the sound decoders that
yeah, but the
but you
thing is,
just don't have that.
I guess if you're using a decoder under the layout, how do you consist all those decoders with a locomotive and know which one to pick from?
Well,
In
the way
essence, the locomotive has to broadcast its own location in some way.
Yeah.
Right,
Just
but
dispatch
transponding's
the
only one way. Transponding's only one-way communication. That's where Railcom shines because it's two-way.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
easy two-way.
The only transponding you can get right now is in the Digitrax decoders.
Yeah, that's the thing. To make the soundtrack system work.
And a lot of times they don't even work.
No, you're right.
Mhm.
It doesn't. It's got flaws. But soundtrack supports using transponding to switch speakers, but it's Digitrax transponding, which means Digitrax only decoders. Now, that being said, Digitrax does make a transponding chip that you can attach to another manufacturer's decoder to, but when to switch speakers.
Yeah.
You can get
A lot
kind
of
of the
them-
directional information you want from speakers by using that, but if you're looking for like something like Just rail sounds under the layout.
Yeah, Soundtracks is using the back EMF to get their triggering their sounds.
But that
Yeah.
means you have to be on train to actually have that on board the locomotive. The problem is, if you
No,
could
this
reach
is putting Soundtracks under the layout.
it is for the surround track system, but there's a lot of
Right.
little pieces that go into that. And I've solved everything but train speed in my system. So I have a whole home audio system that's not hard to do. There's fairly simple systems, running, Raspberry Pis or something like that to actually handle a lot of this. Speakers are cheap, little amplifiers are cheap. The whole arrangement is cheap. Well, I mean, it scales to some extent, but it's ultimately fairly cheap. And I've give up on actually creating the sounds with a Procom controller because you can't do
On
speed
and off.
sense. Pardon?
That's strictly an on and off type switch for the Procom.
Yeah.
And what about using like the Soundtrack sound card boards? Because there you can process multiple ones with your locomotive and then problem solved.
Yeah, that's the direction I'm headed. I still don't know how you deal with the. Okay, so you take a single Soundtrack's sound card decoder, consistent with your train.
Right.
Send that single Soundtrack's sound card decoder output to any speaker that is triggered by occupancy detection under a given train. Again, that's not horrible. That's not horribly difficult to do with the combination of RFID and block occupancy detection. I just haven't been able to get an accurate read of the speed of the train.
Yeah, now here's the thing.
But the Soundtrack board uses the throttle setting to make the click-clack noises.
Yeah.
Pretty simplistic. It's not as elegant as you suggest, where it actually uses the train speed.
Now the question is, Andy, why do you want these sounds to come out from under the layout? I mean, rather than stay. Not that you won't stay the train where you want to do it.
The simple answer for that, Barry, is that he wants the user experience. The speakers are going to be where the people are standing, so when the train gets closer to them, it's going to be noisier.
True, but how loud do you really want it? Is it necessary to have an external amplifier system?
Well, I mean, as we found in shows, it gets pretty noisy.
And I've been fairly low-powered speakers, but a lot of them, one every 18 inches. Very, small speakers directly under the roadbed. I've already have a trench cut in my styrofoam framework for the entire layout. I have a 2-inch deep trench under all track work, ready to receive these speakers every 18 inches. I'm isolating the track every 18 inches, so I have block occupancy. However, the sound effect, and I've even looked at I even had originally looked at sound car decoders for multiple cars in a consist. The problem is they're impossible to put in an empty coal hopper, which is the critical part of operation on an Appalachian coal hauling railroad. So they're just too hard to hide in my type of equipment. So it has to be under track sound. I've been working on it for a little while, and I've got a lot closer.
Well, those speedometers that they have, they're all infrared. If you hooked up the infrared around the track, you can put it in the track itself at the ties so they can't be seen, and trigger each one as you come around. You could actually use a board like it's in that speedometer to tell you how fast your train's actually running and trigger your sounds.
Well, you can do the same thing with block occupancy detection, I think. I just haven't found the logic to do it. So I can't find a way in JMRI, because I have block occupancy every 18 inches. And that's pretty accurate, and they fire quickly. I just can't find the logic in JMRI to say, block 27 just fired, now block 28, now block 29, and hence the train is traveling at this relative speed for every 18 inches of coverage. The only trick that I can't find, the reason I mentioned the question here is since you guys are so familiar with JMRI, is I can't find a way without writing a third-party plug-in to JMRI to do that calculation.
Yeah, I don't think it does that. You would have to do that. Now, here's something.
You have to write your own piece of code.
Professor Kleiser here has been commenting in the Q&A, and he did mention something about using the JMRI virtual sound decoder. And I'm wondering if it's something, if you wrote some custom or got some custom sound files for that, essentially you consist that with your locomotive, and it can play the sounds out through your PC speaker. Okay, so what if you were to take that, put it into your amplifier that's going to distribute to your switches, then just use block detection to switch your speakers.
Absolutely, I'm completely on board with that. I've been playing with that sound decoder. The trick to the whole equation still comes back to the speed of the train. That's my only caveat that I haven't been able to assess.
Well, with the virtual sound decoder, it should be synced to the speed of the locomotive because it can play prime mover sounds and everything. So if you just set it up to play brake squeal,
And track click.
And yeah, track click sounds, maybe you could use it in that fashion, and there it would be synced up with the throttle because it's consistent with the locomotive,
Right.
essentially.
Or manually notching probably makes all the difference in the world, because manually notching would let me simulate real speed versus prime mover speed.
Yeah, but that's not going to do anything with your brake sounds, brake squeal, etc.
Can't you operate that with a function? So you would apply a function, and that would
Well,
trigger.
the thing is, if you use the virtual sound decoder, you could probably, I don't know how complex it is, but you could probably map a brake squeal function to a function button.
I'm okay with that.
And here's a completely different thought around this. I don't know, you've probably given it credence, and I don't know if it would work. But, if your engines have the sounds and they have the synchronized squealing already built in, then why not use small microphones along the way and attach to several speakers? Each microphone would be attached to a primary speaker and several other speakers as you dissipate. So it would pick up the sound of the engines. It would pick up the actual vibration as a sound of the engine and the train moving, and you could then channel that back to its set of speakers as it goes by.
Well, you could actually put a wireless speaker in the locomotive, and I'm fine with that, and you would get the benefit of back EMF. That's great for some part of the effect.
Some microphones would pick up the distance sound. The other primary microphones that are the closest would pick up the main sound. And then upcoming microphones would pick up sounds that's approaching. And
that's the thing. That would all have to be mixed together and output through one speaker.
Well, each microphone is hooked up to several speakers along the path.
Yeah, I mean,
this doesn't account for. Then you get into an issue of accounting for train length.
Well, the train length's a train length, right? As the sound's being picked up as it goes by. So even the last car is being picked up, whatever it is, and you're presenting that sound. The speaker closest to the engine picks up the engine sound. The speakers and the microphones closest to the last box car, if you will pick up the last box car sound.
That would actually kind of work well if you.
And you got the speed, issue resolved right there. The faster the train goes, the next microphone picks up, the next microphone picks up, the previous microphone drops as the train goes by.
Well, with metal wheels, if you put every 39 scale feet, if you put a notch in the track, which I am doing, but it's not a very loud sound. Not a very loud sound effect. But using microphones, you might be able to amplify that.
Right.
And you could mount the microphone strategically under the track, under the layout, so it has, or with some holes, that it can pick up the engine sound and the vibration sound. The made by the actual on the surface.
I don't even need the engine sound run through the speakers. All I want is, it seems like a lot of trouble for what I'm doing, but clack, 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 and brake squeal are extremely. When you're rail fanning, those are the predominant sounds that you hear. I mean, they're
right.
extremely predominant, and they're totally.
Here's the thing. I mean,
here's
one thing we're not all talking about. We have mentioned the soundtrack's sound card board. Now, literally, that you put it in a car with a speaker connected to the track. Okay. Its effects are based on the locomotive settings. It has no motor, so it uses no back EMF.
Right.
Right? Why can't you hook that under the layout to the DCC bus? Say if you're running 10 locomotives, you would mount 10 of them or whatever under the layout as inputs to your sound system. Okay? Then you pick the one you want to consist to your locomotive or locomotives, and then you just consist with a little magnetic wand, and now it's tied to that engine's performance. It's not in the train, but it's tied to the signal bus and the track bus, so it gets the same commands that your locomotive does. You just wrap the audio out to your audio system. And you might need multiple audio connections to each of the sound card boards, and then those would feed into your speaker distribution system.
Oh yeah,
Then
and each trade, you just need a sound car
board, which is $30 for
each
each consist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. And manual notching really kind of solves the dilemma anyway, because
well,
that
the thing is, manual notching would be useful if you're consisting multiple locomotives that are from different manufacturers. But let's say you decided I'm putting all TCS wow sounds in your thing. Their automatic notching's pretty highly accurate. And going downhill, you have the benefit also of using functional dynamic braking.
which I'm mostly steam. But
I'm
I do
steam.
want sound effects of a steam locomotive working as hard as it can work, but the train creeping along at a fairly slow speed, because that's exactly what happened in my geographic region.
Yeah, there's really no manual notching in steam locomotives, though.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it doesn't have notching. It plays chuffs based on the speed of the locomotive.
Solve the problem. Like if you could somehow each car switch on off the sound as it goes by, a little squeal sound file, for example.
Well, block occupancy detection and firing those sound is where I started with this. The problem is the click, click, click is a very different sound if the train is creeping along at 2 miles an hour versus cruising by at 70. That's a very different sound file. I thought about using like 32 different sound files, but I couldn't figure out how to fire them.
See, that's where, I mean, you could do the same thing with the sound, like I said, with the sound cardboard, just consistent with that locomotive, and it'll speed up or slow down the sound based on your speed. But you can also do the different things like that with the virtual sound decoder in JMRI too. Like Professor Kleiser mentions here, you can do speed mapping and trigger different sounds depending on your current speed step. So that's still a possibility, and that's free. You just take the output.
The price is right for that method.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
I would actually investigate that. Look at the virtual sound decoder first. You might have to build some sound files and stuff and configure it. But in the end, I think that might actually be a good thing to start testing with. And if you're not happy with that, get a single sound card board. They're $30. Hook it to your amplifier and your switching system to switch speakers, and then consist it with an engine and play with it, see how that sounds. But starting with the using the virtual sound decoder just to do brake squeal and clickety-clack sounds based on speed, I mean, you'd have to build a sound profile so the clickety-clack sounds speed up or slow down, but you could do that. And so you play a different file based on what speed steps you're running. Like
I'm really curious
the professor said.
Because George Sellios, when on his railroad, if he speeds up his train going across, the sounds from underneath the layout are faster. If he slows down, the sounds are a lot slower. I want to know how he does it.
Yeah, that would actually be something interesting to find out.
Yep.
I've never read anything about it at all, so.
If you watch some of his videos, you'll actually, as the train comes around the trestle and comes down through the front of the town, you can hear the click-clack of the rails, brake squeal and all, travels with the train at the speed the train's doing. And if he speeds up the train and comes down through faster, it travels with the train faster.
Yeah, I just assumed he was
adding is quicker.
That was the idea with the whole train.
Well, you know what? I don't know if he's going to be there in January, but in March, when we go up to the Fine Scale Expo next year, it's going to be in Boston, and I'm hoping his layout will be on the layout tour.
It's supposed to be.
If I go there, which I'm getting a free pass, so I'm going. I'm definitely going to go see that.
If it's on the tour.
What's that, Mike?
Just ask for your money back if it's not on the tour.
There you go. Ask back for the no money that I spent. That was so much fun, man. Yeah, I would start try the VSD out. Even if you got some simple sounds, got a few different sounds, and set them to a couple different speed steps for your function mapping. and let's see how it works. If it does, you can build a better sound profile, but let's do something simple, like.
Yeah, I've got to figure out how to build the sound profiles. I've already been playing with the virtual sound decoder for a little while. That was my first inspiration for this whole thing, honestly. It's the thing that has sent me down this road and will probably cost me thousands of dollars.
Probably.
Yeah.
But also, like I said, if you could mount the sound cardboard under the layout, and you just buy the speaker outputs into your audio amp, and then your switching system is built based on block detection switching the speakers, that might work too, because there's a simple you consistent with the magnetic wand to your locomotive, and then you're ready to go. And then it controls the sounds for you. So it knows if the locomotive slows down to slow down the clickety-clack, apply brake squeal.
Yeah.
So that might actually be the perfect thing to do. But since VSD is free, it's worth experimenting with before you go spend money. But
Oh, yeah.
$30 for one board to play with too, that's cheap to play with too,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, it is now 12:01. I think we've beat DCC to death, given DC its fair due. I mean, obviously all of us in here understand and love DCC, but I will never dismiss anybody who wants to stick with DC wiring. Just that I will try and explain to them, if this is what you want to do, here's your options. So, but it's still a valid technology, but you get into our layouts, forget about it. That's all I can say. So any thoughts you want to add, Mikey, before we close out this second episode of ours?
Yeah, keep pushing the technologies. Keep trying to figure out how to make it more realistic. Yeah, if you want to stick with DC, you can do a lot of crazy stuff with it. It takes a little more effort because of the integration. DC gives you a lot more flexibility running trains. But there's a place for DC. In all honesty, there's still a place for it.
Yeah, so we'll definitely touch on some more of the topics, on electrically as we go down the road. We have to start fleshing out what our topic is going to be coming up. The June show at the end of June will be on DCC speaker, sound speaker selections and installations. So we'll have some examples of speakers and such like that too for installation, different methods Mike and I have tried, and show you some of the things we've learned along the way. So hope you all looking forward to that. I'd like to thank everybody that popped in here tonight and all the fun topics we've been talking about. And Andy certainly gave us a lot of good food for thought.
Absolutely.
And with all the stuff about CTC. So these are the kind of things that we hope to discuss on this show on a monthly basis, and help expand our viewers' knowledge of how much fun you can have with this hobby. So. All right, so everybody, you take care. We will all see you next month, and we'll see you on the live show next month. And have a good evening. See you later.
Yep.